So, I'm here today to talk about something that's happened to me very recently, and I'm going to give it a title. I'm going to call it Ego Activation and the Opportunity of Relationship. A bit of a mouthful, but let's see if I can untangle it all for you. Now, the most obvious thing to say is that every single human being has an ego, and the ego is a completely essential part of us. We need our ego in order to function in this planet, in this world. It's our ego that gives us the drive to get things done. It gives us the ability to judge and compare things, to make assessments, to draw conclusions. So I completely accept that the ego is very much a part of human existence, and the only time we ever get any problems with our ego is when things get out of proportion. And what I'm here to do is to talk a little bit about myself, to show just what sort of things can go on in this respect. Now, I went through some very profound experiences as a child which left me completely powerless, and ever since then what has happened is that in certain circumstances, if I get a reflection of that powerless feeling in my present day circumstances, then what tends to happen is I tend to go into what I would call an activated ego mode, where the ego regards itself to be under severe threat, and once that happens, a whole chain of events kick into motion which are extremely unpleasant and distressing for both myself and for those near to me and close to me. So generally speaking, this is the way that it works. I'm speaking very much for myself here, and yet I'm also aware that this is an issue that affects other people too. This is what happens to me. When I get a circumstance in my daily life when I feel powerless, what I find happening to me is I start to get all these feelings, particularly in my lower abdomen, in my gut area, and they surge and they move around, and it feels pretty darned uncomfortable, pretty unpleasant. And here's the most important thing: when this kicks in, I have no conscious awareness of it happening whatsoever. I lose consciousness. I actually lose my normal state of awareness, and I've gone into an unconscious mode of being, and then what I'm doing is I'm reacting and I'm defensive. Now, here's a really strange thing to say, because, good grief, you know, I've lived some years in this life, and it's only literally been in the last week that I've finally got a handle on this. And here's the difficulty. The difficulty is, so long as I'm unaware that my ego is being activated, I have absolutely no ability to do anything about it at all. Now, in my daily life, most people who know me haven't seen this quality. It's only people in intimate relationships which get to see it. So many times throughout winter and spring last year, I lost my temper, I went off on one, I went from 0 to 60. There's all these expressions we can use to describe when a person loses their normal sense of togetherness and rationality, and suddenly it's as if they become a different person. And so time after time, I have actually caused my relationships to disintegrate through my own unconsciousness in that state. And my partner looked at me with an increasing sense of dismay. Oh my goodness me, yes, I know he's going through a hard time, however this behaviour is unacceptable, I really can't stand it. So guess what, somewhere around about halfway through last year, she had had enough, and she said, that's it, it's over as far as I'm concerned. It took me some time before I could even accept that, and eventually I did accept that we went our separate ways. And here's a strange thing to understand. The disintegration of the ego is a very powerful thing, because when the ego gets knocked down, it does eventually reform, and when it comes back stronger than ever. So this is not about losing something forever, this is about going through an initiatory experience, losing all your defense mechanisms, and then coming out eventually a lot stronger. So this is what's happened to me. I started to understand fully for the first time in my life that this part of me, which should be my asset, my ally, it's ruled me every time I got into a certain degree of uncomfortableness, which is always to do with feeling out of control. So I feel so much stronger, I feel a very different person for this experience, and I started to come up with some really strong desires, and my biggest desire was first of all based upon the understanding, and the understanding is I have never been able to grasp my ego activation without help. Never, ever, ever. What's happened is I've either never grasped it because I just went defensive and hostile, or eventually I would grasp it. And during that night, because it was something that did take place throughout the night, I had a series of what I will call cascade realizations, and they were a recapitulation of all the different incidents and situations in my life, with the woman I married to, with another partner, with my son and with my daughter. I saw many examples of how I would get out of control and I would then become a really nasty person to be around. My biggest desire was, I want to become consciously aware when my ego starts to activate itself. I want to know what's going on, because then I've got a chance of doing something about it. This is my big burning desire. So throughout the night, finally go to sleep. Following morning, something happens to cause me to feel out of control. And I feel these feelings down in my lower gut. For the first time in my entire life, I do not lose consciousness. I stay in a state of consciousness which is high enough, just high enough, mind, only just high enough to recognize it. And I say to myself these amazing words: I'm just going off on one, I've got a bit of an ego issue going on. Now, as soon as I said that to myself, can you imagine how excited I was? Because for the first time in my entire existence, in this lifetime, I realized I've got a chance to be able to deal with this. And so I didn't look at my partner like she was evil. I didn't look at her like she was nuts. I didn't look at her like she was meaning any hostile or harmful thing towards me, because what I'd learnt the night before is, no matter how I'd felt, she never ever had. She'd always had my best interests at heart. So this is my understanding. All intimate relationships create the possibility for the two people to wake up into their ego situations, and if they can wake up into their ego situations, then they can transform, and once they transform, they've got the chance of creating a new life without having it destroyed by all these horrible arguments. So this is my advice to you. If you're someone who goes off on one, just think about and consider what I've said and see if it's of any help to you, and I just wish you the very best. Thank you.